Okay, we're here in an undisclosed town to talk to a pharmacist who has never vaccinated and doesn't believe in vaccinations. So first off, let's start there. What is it that you have an issue with vaccinations?
Well, I suppose at the end of the day, it's the fact that first of all, I've done a lot of research on vaccines over the years, and I recognised reasonably early on that most of the vaccines or the diseases that the vaccines were for, most of those diseases were had gone from a high amount of death from them to very, very low to virtually under 1%, way before the vaccines themselves were introduced. I think that was the first thing that got me. Probably the second thing that got me was being in a small country town and having, looking at the autism issue. A lot of the time I was actually talking to the mothers and the fathers of those children. And the anecdotal stories that I kept getting from those that were swearing black and blue at the end of the day, that they swore that these autism and stuff happened virtually within 24 to 48 hours of having a wellness visit with vaccines. So those couple of things, and just coupled with, of course, the fact that I'm a firm believer in the immune system itself, even though I understand that no one's really got a perfect immune system because we've been bombarded by toxins in all parts of our environments for many, many years, probably decades. But the way that a vaccine works, in my belief, is that it doesn't trigger the natural unfolding of immunity that happens when you get an infection in a natural way. Only parts of the immune system are activated. And so you're not getting the whole gamut. Plus, of course, most vaccines only use a small particle within the overall virus or bacteria that it's trying to protect against. So, of course, an immune system that is challenged naturally obviously has all of those parts of that virus or that bacteria, and therefore they're getting a much broader immunity to that thing rather than just one single angle. I suppose really that is the reason why I was skeptical about vaccines.
How are you treated as a pharmacist who wouldn't vaccinate? Because most pharmacists now are like shrines to vaccines. And doctor surgeries are like altars to vaccines. Everyone's professing the miracle of them. How was it being a pharmacist who didn't?
Well, luckily, being in a country town and also being here for many years, most people knew what sort of person I was. And it wasn't really a problem from that angle, pretty much until COVID itself hit. The pharmacist vaccination program is probably something that's more in the last 10 to 15 years rather than a longer time. So we're relatively new to that area. So I didn't have much of a problem, but certainly after COVID hit and the fear mongering that was caused during that time to get people to continue, to have the boosters, get the vaccines and stuff, that then changed the tables a little bit. And so I did get, and it didn't take long for the word to get around that I wasn't interested in vaccinating anyone against it, because it was an unknown thing. And irrespective of whether the mainstream narrative is that vaccines work, I was reticent to do it because it was just so new and it was pushed so quickly and it was obviously rammed through. So I wasn't prepared to do that. So I might get accosted in the street a couple of times by people and say, why are you like that? And but look, I actually just kept out of it and spoke as little about it as possible as I could. Once COVID hit, and then you started getting a number of groups on Facebook and such not, I actually found that I was being attacked by both sides, by the governmental narrative side, but also by the freedom side. As soon as, and so I was on a number of groups on Facebook and those sorts of places with respect to that, probably on some of the more private media sites as well. And when, probably 2 or 3 occasions when people recognised that I was a pharmacist, I got vitriol, huge vitriol from the freedom movement, accusing me of being a murderer and so on. Until, of course, they recognised that I was kosher and that I hadn't vaccinated and that I hadn't vaccinated anyone with COVID, let alone any other vaccine. And so that tamed down. But yeah, I had people saying, oh, I hope you rot in hell and stuff like that. But no, look, pretty much because I'm reasonably insular fellow, I've luckily escaped most of that.
Can I ask, as a pharmacist though, we hear that it's a huge income for a pharmacist. In fact, we hear from America that basically, if it wasn't for vaccines, pharmacists wouldn't survive. Is that the same in Australia? I mean, were you giving up a lot of money for not vaccinating?
Actually, that's an interesting question because that is not the truth in Australia. Okay, no. Farmers, I know what doctors were paid and I know what pharmacists were paid. Both of those figures were well below the figures that places like Bunnings and other places that were being asked to vaccinate and had little pop-up vaccination tents. They were getting paid much more than that. I remember hearing that one of the Bunnings stores was getting like $90 plus per vaccine. And within the pharmacy, I think the doctors were about $30 odd. I don't quote me on that perfectly, but the pharmacists were down around about $16. Now, when you know that you've got to put probably half an hour to or more into organising things and getting things out at a pharmacist that's at a rate of $60, $70 an hour, then we didn't make any money off it at all. Which I was really happy about because then I couldn't be seen as being a person who was making money because whilst our, I won't go any further than that.
Yeah, that's good. There's the other thing too is, as far as I know, the vaccine was meant to be kept incredibly cold. Like saying -70, which I don't know if that's achievable. But how could an ordinary pharmacist manage to keep the vaccine that cold? Because that would have cost money for power and everything else. And what did they do once it had gone out of date? Did they still push it, or did they lose out the money of, do they buy the vaccines themselves and lose money?
So the cold chain storage mechanism we've got would not allow to have -70 degrees. It was impossible to do that. So according to the powers that be, there were vaccines that didn't need to be kept that cold, and those are the ones that were used, really. We didn't get anything that needed the -70 storage. As for vaccines that were out of date, I would imagine that every single pharmacist worth their salt would have actually gotten rid of those and not used them. There was no way that was going to be done. Not in the circles that I know. Most pharmacists that I know are very ethical and very honest in that regard, and separate to the pushing that they got, and the fact that they were beholden to the system with APRA and the medical bodies that exist in Australia. Separate to that forcing of that, no, that just didn't happen. Yeah.
And but the pharmacists themselves, they have to buy the vaccine. If they don't manage to give them to it, do they lose out, or does the company buy them back?
My understanding is that the vaccines were you've just ordered them and you were given them. The government paid for the lot. Yep.
Okay, so it's free.
Well, taxpayer free.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing too is, who controls pharmacists? Are you controlled by APRA as well, or is there another body? And were they as stringent as the bodies that were controlling doctors and nurses?
Well, APRA is the body that controls all health professionals in Australia. Separate to your TGA and all of that sort of stuff. They are the body. My understanding is that they're an independent body of government and also independently financed. And so, of course, that really it doesn't sit well with transparency with me. But yeah, we were covered by APRA, and APRA were very firm. Perhaps not initially, but eventually, once they started seeing pushback, they became more dogmatic and more forceful. I remember receiving an email from APRA, pretty much saying that if you go against the narrative of the health departments, then you are transgressing your what's the word? Yeah, responsibility to APRA. You are transgressing those, and that you would be taken to account for that. So it didn't matter. You just had to follow the line, whether you liked it or not. In talking about safe and effective, I think one of the biggest problems that happened from the very beginning is that people didn't ask the question, what does safe mean? What does effective mean? Because for me, if a treatment has the ability to cause damage of any form, you can't call it safe. But if a treatment has the ability to cause death, which we've now seen is possible. And we've seen that admitted all around the world. But you can't call a vaccine that has the propensity to cause death safe. It's just, it's just enough. You can't do that. And when they say that it's, if you recall back to the beginning when they first started touting these vaccines, saying they're like, I mean, Al Buller of Pfizer was saying that his vaccine or their vaccine was 100% effective. And then, of course, as time went by, they recognised that it wasn't as effective. And so you saw those numbers come down and come down and come down. And eventually it got to quite a low percentage. Now, if a vaccine that you're calling effective, and let's just take COVID for example, has the ability, doesn't have the ability to stop you from getting the infection, doesn't have the ability to stop you from getting sick, doesn't have the ability to stop you from going to hospital, doesn't have the ability to stop you from dying, how can you call that effective?
Or maybe if you have another goal in mind, it could be seen as effective. The other thing I'm interested in, though, and this is just from a practical point of view, surely a pharmacist or a doctor or a nurse are on the front line of looking for side effects. You would be the ones going, hey, we've been pushing this vaccine for 3 weeks. We have these side effects. We think this needs to be addressed. Surely you are, that is your duty as pharmacists to record this. So if you're not allowed to mention it, if you've got to keep silent, then isn't there some sort of, you say everyone's ethical, but isn't that an erosion of ethics?
I wouldn't call it an erosion of ethics myself. I would call it coercion. I would call it pressure. I would call it, you know, you have your likes of your William Blaze, and there was a guy in this state as well that was heavily involved in speaking out. And when they did, they were jumped on pretty quickly. And most of the ones that were outspoken, I think there's another lady, Dr. Miley Trin, you've probably heard of her. Yep, and it was the same for her. They just jumped on top, and they made incredible examples of these people. And you know, the herd mentality is very strong in human beings, and so I think all of those factors together, the coercion, the cancelling, the punishments of people who spoke out early, and not just punishment, but absolutely trashing them and following them everywhere they went. And I think all of those things added up to people becoming, just being silent. It was I spoke to you about this before, about the self-censorship that was done. And it's very powerful. And people don't want to rock the boat. I mean, pharmacy, like medicine, like nursing, it's a very incestuous type of industry. And so everybody knows everybody. And so you don't want to be shown to rock the boat. It was bad enough just having me say I'm not going to do it. You know, that was bad enough, let alone speak up against it.
What you're saying there is that the process of how they brutalised William Bay, Dr. Hobart, Dr. Borchos, Dr. Miley Trin, that's still ongoing. That it's not just to attack these doctors, but it's to use the attack to basically control the rest of you. Do you really want to have this happen to you? 100%. So shut the F up.
That's 100% true.
Yeah. So that's what the... So we're in a brutal regime at the moment when it comes to our health.
Yes, we certainly are. But I think that it's going to be a little bit down the track, but eventually, hopefully, we'll get to the place where they recognise that this was not the right thing to do. It was just a repeat of the Nuremberg stuff, really, at the end of the day. It was just a repeat of, I was doing as I was ordered. And to me, that's not a good enough excuse.
In Miley Trin's case, in one of her court or the tribunal hearings, I think the magistrate, whoever ruling it, said to her, in this case, the Nuremberg laws don't apply. What do you think of that?
I think that's just an easy cop-out, don't you?
Going back, though, doctors and pharmacists have one thing in common. People want to trust you. They want to come up with their illness. If they don't want to go to a doctor, think a pharmacist can handle it. But they want to trust you. They go to you, and not just for advice as you're the front of a pharmaceutical company. No, in society, you are a human being that they want to trust. And yeah, and so when they come up now, So this is more not so much against Big Pharma and everything else going on. It's more for how the public lose out. If the public find that they're not actually talking to the pharmacist anymore, the pharmacist is just a frightened sales rep for Big Pharma. How do we benefit as a people if we've lost this valuable relationship, both with our pharmacists and doctors?
Well, that's it. That's it, isn't it? Probably pharmacists historically have been more trusted than doctors. Yeah, I would. Yeah. I think the loss of trust has really it's happened during COVID, especially with the vaccines, and it's a sad thing because the government's always come up with beautiful buzzwords to try and twist the agenda to their angle, and the one they came up here was vaccine hesitancy, right? It's a very nice word because what it says is that at the end of the day is that these people really, they want to have the vaccine, they're just hesitant, but that's just not true. The bottom line is they just don't want them, point blank, we don't want them and we don't ever want to take them. And so I think that's what they do. They use these political wordings to make things seem better. I think that the trust and today they're harping on about the fact that the trust has gone. I mean, the truth is that there's a lot more people not taking vaccines, not just COVID, but all of them now because of what happened during COVID. And I suppose from the government's point of view and from farmers' point of view, Big Pharma's point of view, that's not a good thing. But from my perspective, it's a good thing because people are starting to say, look, I need to understand what's in these things. I need to be informed. The usual old story of informed consent, because we never had informed consent. Even our governments didn't have informed consent when they went ahead with what they did. So I think trust is shot, and they're worried about it, hugely worried about it. The programs that they're putting out today are aimed directly at the vaccine hesitant to get them to come back in line. I think it's going to be a long time before that happens.
Can I ask, when it comes to a pharmacist, how coveted is this trust of the public? It's and you can have it for any job. I used to, years ago, I was a tram driver. There was a tram driver been there 56 years. He built his identity on the fact that he took people and got them there safely to their destination. As a pharmacist, and pharmacists everywhere watching this, how much would they be affected by that loss of trust?
Well, the actual trust itself for pharmacists above many other, if not all other professions, was a point of pride for us. Huge point of pride for us. Unfortunately, now pharmacists as well as doctors and nurses are going to be put in the same basket, whether we like it or not, no matter and whether we were involved or not, or to whatever depth we were involved. We've lost that trust. I think that what's going to happen is that the usual story will happen, and that is everything will be glossed over and there'll be many more stories come out, and eventually people will just even forget that it was ever a thing. And I think that's what individual pharmaceutical bodies are hoping for. But at an individual level and from a personal level, I'm very disappointed that trust has been lost, because we built that trust over decades. And it's not going to affect me because I'll never go back to being a pharmacist, because I just can't now after that. After they used us in such a horrible way, I just can't go back to that. I'm prioritising my time for other things and things that are more important and things that are valued more.
There's another thing happening now. We call them chemist whisperers. They go into a chemist. Some take video and video it. I know a lot of them because we've interviewed them. But basically, they go in and they present the pharmacist with the peer-reviewed data and the announcements from the government and the TGA that children under 18 don't have to take the vaccine anymore, or recommend that they don't. And they meet very few pharmacists who actually know about it, acknowledge it. The majority just go, oh, well, we'll be fine. And it's really interesting. Now, I understand there's pride. They don't want to be told by someone who's turning up how to do their job. But it's very surprising, the feedback from them, and they're still pushing it. Like even in Bassendean, where we were just staying, there's a chemist there out the front chalk drawing of a family and it says COVID vaccines safe for all the family and free, come in. Why aren't pharmacists seeing the destruction that so many other people are seeing, and why aren't they alarmed by it? Why are we still seeing them pushing these jabs?
Well, I can't answer for the people that are doing it. I can only give an opinion as to why that's happening. No one wants to believe for a second that they've hurt anybody. You know? So it's like the proverbial carpet and pushing the dust under it. You just want to do that. You just want to get it over and done with and out of the way and out of the sight, out of mind. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. Again, we're herd creatures, and we absolutely fall in line. So, you know, doctors, pharmacists, nurses, nurse vaccinators, they all absolutely do not want to. And even our medical bodies themselves, they don't want, and governmental and politicians, they don't want to admit that they made a mistake. And so they'll just brush it under the carpet. That's as simple. That's how they deal with it. That's how I believe they deal with it. A sad thing, but human nature.
Take it for granted that the vast majority of pharmacists are really decent people who really want to help Australians get better and want to help them with their health. That's their main goal. And now they're here with what's happened in the last few years. Is there any way that you think that they could change it, whether they could come together, have a discussion, maybe come up with some new organisation that governs them and says, look, we are going to take more duty of care in what we sell or what we promote to our customers? Do you think there's any way they could turn around and win trust back that way, because they're actually doing their sort of duty for us, really? I don't know if that's it.
I would like to think that what you're speaking about there is something that's possible. I would like to think that's possible. Personally, I don't think it is. I don't think it is, because I don't think that, well, in order to go down that pathway to achieve that end, you have to admit firstly that a mistake was made. And I don't think that you're going to find that they're going to admit that mistake was made. Do you know?
That's the catalyst. Acceptance.
And I think, you've got to, and I mean, to want to change is to change, but if you don't get to the place where you want to change, because you don't even admit it, you're not going to change, you know. One of the things that's always hit me about, especially from a doctor's perspective, of course, is the usage by the freedom movement of, but what happened to the Hippocratic Oath. And I don't personally believe the Hippocratic Oath exists anymore. And in actual fact, I'm quite sure that they don't actually say the Hippocratic Oath anymore.
I can prove that. I've interviewed doctors. William Bay, he didn't have to pledge it, and we had him on stage. There were several doctors in the audience, and they told us they haven't pledged it since the 80s.
So here's a thing that people can think about as to how getting around the thought of a Hippocratic Oath is done. There is no such thing as a pill without side effects. There's just no such thing. You know, every medicine has a side effect, whether we like it or not. And at the end of the day, it's a balance between, you know, the good and the bad. The risk-benefit ratio, as they call it. Now, the thing, statistics, lies, and damn statistics, right? You know the story. So what happens is, if a drug is given out by a doctor and then a pharmacist, they know that, say, 1 in 1,000 this is going to happen, 1 in 10,000 this is going to happen. So we know that they are not safe, there are side effects. But because when you look at it from a statistical perspective, it becomes impersonal. It doesn't mean you anymore. It means that, and so within the mind of the human, which is very fallible, they can say, well, yes, it happens 1 in 10,000. Yes, it happens in 1 in 1,000 or whatever, but it's not my one that I did. It's somebody else's. And so statistics and the use of statistics have made it possible for people to believe, to pretend that they haven't caused any harm. And yet collectively, we have done lots of harm. If you were to talk to a lot of people in the freedom movement who've done their research, they would say that the third leading cause of death in the Western world is medical mismanagement, behind cancer and heart issues and so on. And that's a damning accusation, you know. And depending on how you use your statistics, because of course you can get statistics the same thing, some people actually say it's even more. That in actual fact, we are the third leading cause of damage to human beings in the world, in the Western world. That's crazy.
Okay, I'll finish there. So that's the stuff done with um, the vaccines. I think this for a second part now would be to talk about your view of natural immunity. Why you like natural. I think we have to remind people, I might just have to have a quick clash, but I think the process is to embolden people to remind them how incredible your natural immunity is. They seem to have forgotten that.
They have, but this is one of the things that actually makes me laugh about the freedom movement. Right, because they claim natural immunity, I trust my immune system. Yeah, none of them have any idea their immune system's fucked. Well, this is a great thing to talk, that they don't realise that your immune system is not like your dad's immune system, your mum's immune system. Your grandfather's and grandmother's immune systems were way better than ours. Our immune systems have been challenged and been truncated for decades. And this is by stuff in our food, pesticides, herbicides, vaccines, vaccines, medicines, even just brushing your teeth. Microplastics. I was talking to you about this. Yeah, and so it's coming from everywhere. This is, and I won't talk about this on there, but imagine this scenario. Autism, right? If you've got 50 different ways that you can cause autism, then when you do the statistical analysis of only one of those things, then the background noise is going to make it so that you can't see. Yeah, that there. Does it make sense? Yeah, right. So it's the same with all of it. If you had all these multiple prongs of attack, how do you prove what did what?
Yeah, that's true. The interesting thing, the amount of people I've interviewed. See, when I started interviewing about COVID injuries, but then I started keeping meeting people saying, no, I'm talking about my son. And they all go, it happened right after the MMR. Usually the MMR. It just happened straight after. I tell you, he went in. One guy I interviewed that still upsets me. He said his son was terrified of needles, so he's sitting in front of him doing this, and he watched him vanish into his soul.
I mean, I had a partner once.
That's right. We get this. I get that from the movie. The other thing I'm really interested though is the values. So, like you said, people need to be a part of the herd. That's the truth. That's the truth.
Absolutely.
And so they need to be a part of the herd, and that's why we're saying in the Blue Bee, still be a part of society. Just want to think for ourselves. That's the only. So, but they want to be a part of the herd. But the cost now comes at literally endangering your children. And how have we got to a point where the need to be a part of the herd is more
important than the long-term health of your child? That's how powerful the herd mentality is. Do you know, what's really interesting, right, in regard to this, is that I remember when they started reducing the age of the people who could get the vaccine, when these vaccines were never intended to give to anyone but adults. Never. From the very beginning. The guy, the head honcho in England said, we're only going to give these to the adults. Wow. And then they changed, and they don't start yet. Oh, now I want to share the story with you. Yeah. And I remember when in Australia they started talking about giving it to 6 months and below. Yeah. And you had some people that were kicking up before starting to kick up now. Yeah, right. I remember one post that someone put up in was one of the freaking movements and that saying, oh, I can't do that. And I said, where was your fucking voice when we were giving it from the very beginning to pregnant women? You're talking about 6 months old? Like, we've already been vaccinating the neonates, and now you're upset about the 6 months. Oh, what part of that disconnect is I do all these peaceful rants and all these things, but when that happened, when they give you, I said, where are your fucking balls in the back of this? That's the only one that's gone uber viral. Shit, people still, I've met a guy who says, I watch that every morning. I couldn't get the brain disconnect from people going, oh, they can't give it to 6 months olds. But you can shut up when we're giving it to Hannah in the loop. I know. Look, what's wrong? Hannah. We met a woman whose grandson was being born extremely prematurely. He just made the cutoff. And it's because her placenta calcified. Couldn't, and it's happening a lot now, couldn't actually support the baby. We're hearing a lot of this. And they were told it was the jab. The boy knew, the father knew it was the jab. He was told. Somehow they were told. And so it's one of those rare cases. And the child was going to be born. And the grandmother said,
So surely you're not going to give them any more vaccines. And the father turned around and said he's having every vaccine that's on offer. The only reason he's got a child is because the child somehow survived his mum getting vaccinated and almost killing him. And yet he's still going to comply to the point that he cuts off contact with his mother.
Let me share with you how strong that...
I didn't know it at the time, but apparently the pharmacy franchise, got early access to COVID vaccinations, and so they then vaccinated all their staff. And I didn't even know it. I didn't even have a chance to tell my kids not to take it. That was the one that they took off eventually, which was the AstraZeneca. Within 24 hours, my daughter was in hospital with all the TTS symptoms. And no one told me, because correct combination shit. And when I was finally told, luckily, it only lasted 24 hours and she was out and she was fine. She hasn't. Yeah, she was told that she needed to have more. But even though that happened, and I just said, don't do it. You know what she said to me? She said, Dad, please don't tell anyone. Instead of telling the world, she was embarrassed by getting it.
So she felt,
that she failed. She didn't want to let the world know, because that's how...
I can better that. I interviewed a priest in Kelmscott, Polish priest, didn't take it on our side. He said he had well over 100 parishioners come up to him in confession, say they've had severe reactions, but they don't want anyone to know, because they don't want anyone to know that they don't want to be seen as anti-vaxxers.
Yeah, crazy. That's how strong that fear-mongering and that coercion and that self-censorship is.
That's a really interesting thing to talk about. As much as you can in this.
I'm not going to talk about my daughter because
no,
exactly.
No. I don't expect you to do that. But this is this really bizarre thing, because the thing is, we have so much autism now, and you and I are walking museums. We remember a time we did not have this much autism. In fact, we never even knew the word autism.
And now 1 in 10,000 in the early 70s, 72. Now it's 1 in 24 in boys and 26 in girls. In California, in the boys, it's 1 in 12. My God.
And you walk around the shopping centres during the day, because we live on the road, and they're just cripple creeks, we call them. There you see the old, big, fat people, everyone's sick, and there's these young boys walking around in a daze with these carers. I've written about it. It's screaming material.
One word from the establishment about looking after your body. No, I mean, obesity was a huge red flag. Yeah, COVID. But not a single person said, that's bad. Sheilas were closed. The brothels were open. You know, you couldn't go and get healthy food, but you could get...
We're still trying to find out from a sex worker how they did it. So you've been a pharmacist in the explosion of vaccines, from where there was a few to where it's now a religion, even though you didn't...
But I probably started in the 90s. That's when I first started.
So how much was it then? Was it still... Was that no jab?
We weren't vaccinating then. Okay, no, not back in the early, like in the mid-90s.
Oh, so that was a doctor?
Yeah, that was just doctors.
You started when pharmacists didn't vaccinate?
Yeah.
Okay, so when did you start?
I don't remember the exact date because I never did it.
Yeah, I know, that's right. That's it.
But obviously it's versions. Look, right up until probably 3, 4, 5 years ago, just before COVID, flu vaccine was the only one we did. Yeah. You know, now they're starting to look at broadening that area. Now we're doing what they will, during COVID, we started doing COVID vaccines. But of course, now that the agenda has been set and the conditioning has been put in place, you'll see pharmacists' vaccination abilities broadening hugely.
Wow, especially with less doctors. I mean, we're going to towns
I mean, it'll be on catch fire, won't it? Doctors are hard pressed, they're too busy, whatever. We can let pharmacists do it. They know what they're doing. They know the words they need to use to get people to be coerced.
Well, let's see how we go from there. So I'll get back from there. Okay, this is part two. So you were just saying that when you started in the 90s, pharmacists didn't give vaccines. So it's really just started with COVID.
Well, before COVID, the only vaccine that we gave was the flu vaccine. And even that, it probably only goes back probably 1.5 decades, maybe 2 at the most. I can't recall because, of course, I've never given one. But yeah, that's the story. And I think you're going to find that as time goes by, now that COVID has conditioned everybody, and now that pharmacists are seen as the natural givers of both COVID vaccines and flu vaccines, that there will be a versioning of the different types of vaccines that pharmacists will be able to have under their belt to be able to give, and it will really take off. Yeah. And they'll probably also use the fact that there's the struggling to get doctors. I mean, we're doing country towns now that have hospitals, big hospitals, that don't have a doctor. You have to do video conference calls. I think that's going to be one of the things that the Pharmacy Guild and people that are involved in increasing the realm of what pharmacists do will be using to push gaining access to giving all of the other vaccines. Absolutely. I think that's going to happen.
Let's talk. Both of us are of the vintage that can remember a time when we never heard the word autism. I mean, maybe you did in your field growing up, but as a child, we never heard it. Now, let's look at the statistics. Let's tell them the statistics for Australia and California and what they were in the 70s.
Well, so from the research that I've done, it appears to me that back in the early 70s, the autism rate was around about 1 in 10,000. And I probably know more about American studies because it's been very well researched there. But today, after all of these years, we're seeing autism rates of 1 in 24 in boys and 1 in 26 thereabouts with girls in America. You're seeing in California in particular, it is very, very high. And I've heard one study say that the rate in boys, young boys, was 1 in 12. Now, that's just crazy. Now, we've also obviously got to take into consideration a couple of things. First of all, that the argument that we have better ways of diagnosing it now, and so the diagnosis has improved, and that's really one of the reasons why the rates have gone up. And I understand that as a principle, but my answer to that would be that argument started probably 15, 20 years ago, and I don't think over the last 10 plus 15 years that the ability to diagnose has increased that markedly. And if that's the reason why those rates have gone up, then why are we still seeing these incredible increases, right?
Do you think you need a professional diagnosis to identify a young man or a young woman, especially a young man with autism? I mean, it's pretty self-evident.
What's really interesting is that years and years ago, it was very difficult to get a diagnosis of autism. They were very reticent to do it. Obviously, much more now. The other point I was going to make is that if the diagnosis capacity has increased, and that's one of the main reasons for the increase in rates of autism, then why aren't we seeing the same rate increases of autism in adults that we're seeing in children? Because the diagnosis capability would cover both those areas, but we aren't seeing that. We're seeing it just in children. And of course, all of those years ago, which started in America, with the immunity given to vaccines, I think that was during, who was the president actor? A guy that was the Western actor, Reagan. It was during his time that this happened. And there was a huge conflab about it when the vaccine industry was asking for immunity. And when it was explained to Congress and Senate back in those days, the statement was made to those vaccine companies, well, why don't you make it safer? And the answer, my understanding is that the answer that was given is, we can't because vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. And those two words are, to my knowledge, still embedded in the legislation that was written. And that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. And if you don't give us immunity, we're not making any more, and we won't be able to save all the lives we're saving.
So we have documentation from the Congress hearing in the 60s, 68 I think, into measles. And in the hearings they state that measles is minor. It's a minor childhood illness. It's not something they should be concerned about. And we interviewed a funeral director in one town. He'd been there for 50 years, and he said he'd never buried anyone with measles, any child ever. It just never happened. This was pre. So I'm not saying it didn't happen, but for the amount of autism we have and our refusal to really go looking for the cause, for the sake of how many children died of chickenpox and measles, you talk about the risk-reward, it seems to be way out of balance.
Well, you only have to have one case of measles in today's world for everyone to just go nuts. I mean, it's obvious.
Where in your day they'd have a party and let's get everyone round.
Well, that's what they...
These days. And no one wants to talk about the Amish, do they? Right. And because we know the only cases of autism in the Amish come from those that they've adopted into their fold that have had vaccines. And I'm not saying that vaccines are the cause of absolute cause of autism. I'm sure there's probably multiple prongs of attack that cause these types of neurodiversity, as they call it today, the buzzword today. But look, as I've said to many people, during the course of my time as a pharmacist, I've talked to a lot of mothers and fathers, and the anecdotal stories that have been shared with me of a wellness visit with vaccines given them within 24 to 48 hours, they'd lost their child. You know, I don't care how much you want to shame those people or whatever, but I cannot refute nor can I ignore those stories that I was told over the years that I've been a pharmacist of mothers and fathers saying this is what caused it.
I told you the story of my friend, the fireman. His son had to have, I think it was MMR. He was scared of needles. So he's in his face playing with him, trying to keep us occupied. And he watched his son vanish into himself, never came back. And when I interviewed him, it's like 25 years later, here's this broken man. He's never got past it. And it's out here. But the other thing we're talking about, this is a really interesting thing, that I took it for granted that most people would see their child as their number one responsibility. And most parents do. I mean, parents love their kids. So they're there, they go all out to protect their kid, to help their kid get into school. Not all, but most people do live up to the responsibility of a child to a degree. But it seems when it comes to the herd mentality that people are willing to sacrifice or at least risk the long-term health of their child just to make sure that they and their child are a part of the herd. That's what it seems to be. What is that? I mean, we're not surrounded by wolves and tigers. We're not cavemen anymore. Why is it that this thing is so deep that we're willing to overlook real dangers to be in the herd to protect ourselves from dangers that maybe don't exist anymore?
I actually believe that most parents still have those priorities for their children. I think that at the end of the day, they're not informed of the issues that are involved. You know, the old informed consent is not a thing, especially with vaccines. No doctors or pharmacists or nurses or that sit down and actually go through those lists of things that can happen. So I like to believe, I choose to believe that parents are making the decisions they're making out of simple ignorance rather than weighing up, should I sacrifice my child to this altar of an experiment? You know, I think I like to believe, I want to believe that that's the case, that they're just misinformed.
And is that the business plan? The business plan of Big Pharma then is to make sure do not let these people get informed.
Without a doubt, nothing says lack of transparency like trying to hide the information for 75 years. You know what I mean? So
When we see the censorship on the internet, on all the platforms, everything is about protecting this product because Big Pharma, their economies are bigger than Poland and Sweden. They need to keep vaccinating. They need to keep pumping out pills. So
they have to protect themselves. This is how they do it. It's been a cash cow for a long time. You know what I'm saying? And the industry's protected, obviously not just with legislation, but with self-censorship, with bullying, with coercion, with just not telling the truth about what's going on with these side effects and stuff. I mean, COVID was just an abject lesson in that. The herd mentality issue it's a beast. You know, it's part of our lizard brain stuff. I mean, it is. We want to go along. We go along to get along. It's a simple thing. The powers that be understand that truth, and they use it against us to do that, as witnessed by what we're seeing today around the entire globe.
But even though we've documented so many injuries, and around the world there's so many injuries being documented with MMR, they're putting it into the cows. They're to stop them farting, and there's only like 3 dairies now that have fart-free, where the cows are free to fart, whatever you call it. They're Bovaer, but they're just trying to get it into the food, into lettuce. They're just going nuts with it, even though they're seeing the carnage, and the data speaks about the carnage. Even you were saying you've seen the carnage in your local area as well. We won't say where, with myocarditis. So what is it? Why is now survival instinct kicking in and going, hey guys, we want you to stop putting this stuff in everything because we don't want to eat that food, we want to take the vaccines. What is it that we can't seem to, because there's millions of us, that we can't seem to just rise up even peacefully and say, enough. Enough.
Because you can't rise up peacefully and say enough because you get lambasted and you get cancelled and so on. I mean, that's been the modus operandi, not just for COVID, but for a lot of the more woke agendas of today, you know. I do not understand completely why there were certain... I've asked myself the question, and people that I know that are of a similar mind, what is it that made the difference between those people that just went, yep, I'm taking it, and those people that said, no way? Obviously, there's a conservative bent to the side of people that didn't get vaccinated, and obviously there seems to be a religious side aspect to that as well. I've also noticed a third one, and that is lack of materialistic way of thinking. That I see that as part of it, and it's probably a conglomerate of things. But it's just too powerful, and people, as I said, got to go along to get along. And I marvel. We're becoming two distinct species. That's what it seems. Yeah, you know, with people who just go along with everything, and those people who say go along with nothing. And I think we've actually been pushed over time into these two separate groups. Social media has done that to the nth degree.
We now, just to point with that, like we started a love show, a single show called Loved Up. And it's hard to not do it with a non-discriminatory point of view because the women do not want to go with vaccinated men. That's adamant. That's absolutely, they don't. The men, not so much. The men are thinking, yeah, here, but mainly not. But the women are adamant. And so this is what we're seeing. Like in the future, is basically, is this how they're going to choose who they breed with? I mean, this is where we're at.
I think absolutely there will be that. I don't, but most of the people, well, obviously I'm not vaccinated myself, with COVID vaccine, of course. But I think that is absolutely true. That, and I've heard that. I understand why women are more reticent to have relations with vaccinated men rather than the other way around, men. And I think, without actually going into detail, the reason for that is obvious, because of course it's been shown absolutely that the spike protein and the banana particles that were used to make the vaccines what they were did not stay at the site of injection, but accumulated in specific areas of the body, namely the heart, the ovaries, the testes, bone marrow, brain, lungs, especially, and so yeah, it's very obvious to me what's going on there and why people are reticent. I've met people that are unvaccinated who have had relations with people that are vaccinated, and that they've had what they believe are issues from that, especially women, because well, let's face it, because of the area involved. Yeah.
It's another thing interesting. While we were discussing this part, we were going to talk about natural immunity and the miracle of natural immunity. And you had a great point that our natural immunity is not what our parents' was. Can you explain that further?
Yeah, it's one of those things with the unvaccinated community that they're very proud of, and quite often they say things like we're pure bloods and that sort of stuff. But look, the truth is that we're not pure bloods. Initially, when the vaccines were first put out, there were blood work being done by independent researchers that showed that the blood of vaccinated people was indeed different to the blood of unvaccinated people. But those same researchers over time, 2-3 years, now there is very little difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated blood. So they use the term, and I'll come back to your point about immunity in a moment, but they use the point about shedding, this word shedding. And the reality is that unfortunately the word shedding is not the right word to use. It's been used in the incorrect sort of context. But there's no better word at the time that we had. And so what it actually means is at the end of the day that somehow the vaccinated people were actually sharing portions of what they were vaccinated with other people, especially unvaccinated people. And that is the thing. It's not the typical way of shedding, which about at the end of the day is about a vaccine that then makes people give out attenuated virus and so on. But yeah, the shedding is a thing. Now, going back to your story about immunity, no, one of the catch cries of the unvaccinated community is that they are pure in the fact that they trust their immune system, their God-given immune system. But I would take that to task by suggesting that all of our immune systems today have been attacked and are truncated. They're not the immune systems that our parents and our grandparents had. The natural fact, we can't claim that our immune system's perfect. Not least of which the fact is that the vast majority, 70 or 80% of the world's population, don't have adequate vitamin D levels to enhance their immune systems to the level that's required. But when you look at the advent of herbicides, pesticides, plastics, environmental toxins of all sorts, even hairsprays, hair dyes, underarm deodorants. So whatever it is, our immune systems have been silently bombarded without even the people that are making these products know that that's what they're doing. I think the unintended consequences of a lot of stuff we've done is going to come and bite us in the arse eventually, So no, I don't believe that anybody, let alone people that have had the COVID vaccine, and of course there's that term VAIDS, vaccine-induced AIDS, which doesn't mean you've got AIDS. What it actually means is, at the end of the day, is that your immune system has been challenged and doesn't work as effectively as it should do after you get the COVID vaccine in some cases. Because, of course, not everyone who got COVID vaccines were affected by it. And there are huge, really good reasons as to why that is. And here's a really good point. Years ago, when we had vaccines, we used to do a thing, and especially if they were given intramuscularly, we used to have a thing called aspiration. Have you heard that word yet? Right? So that was the process of putting the needle in and then withdrawing it a little bit to make sure that you hadn't accidentally entered a blood vessel, right? That didn't exist during COVID, yes, right? Now, that's one of the most simple ways that you can make sure that you're, at the very least, doing your best to try and leave that bolus of injection in that muscle rather than to go into the circulatory system. And that was never done during COVID. And so that's one good reason why some people were affected and other people weren't to the same degree. You get me? Yeah, right. And then, of course, you've got, going down to the vaccinators there. the vaccination methodology, no, and that's only one thing. That wasn't the cause of everything, because even just by putting it and missing a vein, it still extravasated, moved out from that area. How could it not? Especially given that they were covered in liquid nanoparticles, that the whole design of that was to evade the immune system. That was their purpose. And that's the same thing about why they used pseudouracil in the spike protein, to make it so that the vaccine itself didn't get attacked by the immune system as quickly as it could have done. So all of those things that they did were to increase the life and the longevity of the vaccine, to elicit that immune response. And so then you have, of course, separate to the moving, how much of it moved out from that area? Where did it go to? How susceptible were those people to the spike protein itself and other components of the vaccine? These are, all of us are individual people. So there are a huge number of factors that would have gone to the whole of whether or not an individual person got a reaction or didn't get a reaction.
Kevin McKern is doing great work in Japan. It's looking very promising, sort of basically filtering out the spike protein and other things. But how difficult is it for ordinary Australians to start repairing their natural immune system, their immune system?
Well, I think it's imperative that we actually start to promote that. As we spoke about earlier offline, we were talking about the fact that during COVID, even though it was absolutely obvious that obesity and other issues, other health issues, cardiac issues, lung issues and that really made those people susceptible to COVID. And also, you've got all of your vitamins and minerals and stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, we are a bag of fluid filled up with electrolytes and proteins and fats and such not. We've only got one place that we put stuff in and a couple of places that it comes out. And if we don't put in our body the building blocks that our body needs to repair itself, then we will never repair ourselves. And I think at the end of the day, that's one thing that people need to start to look at, and that is, what are you eating? What are you doing to your body? What are you putting into your body that enables it to function? I actually believe that if given the right environment and the right nutrition, the body will repair itself, no trouble at all. And I've heard people say in the science realm that if children are given the correct nutrition, they won't catch viruses. They won't suffer from it. If they're given the proper nutrition, the proper building blocks for their, because let's face it, children's immune systems are the healthiest, right, when they're for the first 6 or so years of their life, because they haven't been bombarded with all the crap that the rest of us have. So, in the time when we're vaccinating, like crazy. It's not just vaccines, of course. It's everything I mentioned earlier about, the environmental toxins. And we're only just starting to scratch the surface of microplastics in the body and what effects do they have on us as well. Like I said, just a simple act of brushing your teeth. How many millions of little bits of microplastics are you swallowing every time you brush your teeth? And people do it 3 times a day. So I think vitamin D is one of the big ones, along with vitamin A. I think all of the vitamins are special, and let's face it, some of the vitamins are also hormones, like vitamin A and vitamin D. The vast majority of the world's population are vitamin D deficient, and it was shown very early on in COVID by, can't remember his name, an American doctor, Ryan Cole, who basically said that through the research that he'd done, if you can get your vitamin D level up to the median point or above, you will not have the lung issues that a lot of people had with COVID. You just won't get them because your immune system's just in a better position. It's a very simplistic thing. Watch what you eat. Eat organic where you can. Don't eat stuff that is processed. Don't eat processed foods with preservatives and all that sort of crap in them. Eat fresh as you can. Grow your own veggies if you can, and even grow your own meat, if you can. Of course, the attack on agriculture, and that is part and parcel of the issues that we're facing at the moment. So do all of those things. But second to that, of nutrition, and talk to a nutritionist and get the guts of what you need to do in that regard. But there are other things too, and certainly activity, like exercise. Like your body needs to move. You know, if your body's not moving, then your infrastructure is not supporting the health of your body. The lymphatics, the circulation, all of those things rely on muscle movement in order for them to work effectively. So do those, you know, they're two major prongs. I think one of the third and probably less understood is mind, mood, you know, mental health, huge. You know, the more, you know, you get these, the more you get your spiritual and mental health to a place where you're happy within yourself, that helps your immune system. We know that stress causes cortisol overburden. And we know that sets up an inflammatory chain that causes a lot of the crap that we're experiencing in our lives health-wise. So we need to get to a place where we're not stressed by work, relationships, life itself. We need to get to that place where each individual needs to be responsible for their mental health and for their outlook on life. Gratitude is the best attitude, you know, all of these things. And then, of course, there's the belief system that your body listens to what you say to it. You know, you get these things on Facebook or whatever where someone says, "Oh, little Johnny's got something wrong with him. Please, on Friday night at 6 p.m, let's get everyone praying for Johnny." And we believe in that placebo effect of, you know, and again, we have lots of situations in science where we don't understand how those things work. And so we just brush that under the carpet. If it doesn't exist, let's not pretend. We don't worry about how it works. But look on the reverse side as well, the nocebo effect. Can you imagine if people believe that 1,000 people on Friday night praying for little Johnny is going to help? Can you imagine what the world was like back in early 2020 when COVID hit, when you had 8 billion people around the world shit scared, full of fear? What effect did that have on the overall unfolding of COVID? I mean, your mind boggles with that, doesn't it? That's fantastic. That's a great thought. Even, I can see that you don't take grant, you see there's also some sort of spiritual conscience. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think if people were to say to me, what do you do? What do I do? I would say to them, look after your health, look after your physicality, look after your mental health. Make yourself as independent from the systems you possibly can with energy, water, food. Live your best life and make yourself right with God.